Before we dive in, I would like to share a little bit about the Security Coalition for Engagement and Advancement, or SCEA as we call it. SCEA is a talent pipeline and workforce development initiative dedicated to strengthening the future of the security profession. We convene leaders from across industries, government, academia, nonprofits, and the broader security community to develop solutions that help people discover, enter, advance, and lead within the profession. The Transitioning Public Sector Committee supports professionals shifting from public service, military, and law enforcement to private sector security careers by offering resources, connections, and guidance for a more seamless transition. All right, let's get into this session. Demystifying the security clearance transition into private sector security roles. I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. My name is Colin Daugherty, and I am one of the co-chairs to the SCEA Transitioning Public Sector Committee and a partner at 6 Keys Solutions. Joining us is Jessica Elkin, Director of Recruiting at Vega Federal, Adam Guthrie, Senior Software Engineer at Vega Federal, Nick Ray, President, Securitas Critical Infrastructure Services, and Dr. Doug Edwards, Director, Key Personnel and Event Security at KPMG. All right, jumping in. Jesse, we connected on LinkedIn after you shared some great points and thoughts and insights on this topic specifically. So what made you start posting about this niche issue?
Yeah, so I pretty much started posting about hiring and interviewing in the cleared space because while I've been, the director of recruiting at Vega, I was getting asked a lot of questions that a lot of people in this space should know, but I started realizing like when people are leaving the military, transitioning to civilian positions, or they've been at their company for a long time and don't really know how the transition works when you have a clearance. I was getting these questions a lot and I realized people really need to know this. We live in a world where hiring is always changing, and it's different from every company. So at our company, like having a top clearance is the bare requirement for a role. So kind of just like exploring and learning more about like how you get a job, with having that clearance, but what else you need in addition to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair, and it's complicated to say the least. So you specialize in this industry and again specific sectors. So I guess can I ask you? I mean, generally, like, how many cleared candidates do you think you've placed, and then in general, like maybe what kind of roles?
Yeah, so at Vega, so our company at Vega is a software engineering company. So most of the people I place while I'm here, so I've been here since November. Since I've been here, I've placed about 10 software developers, all top secret cleared or top secret SCI. But before I worked at Vega, I also did the government space. So I was placing people a lot with Boeing. So engineers, technicians, managers in that space. So I've kind of done a lot of different skill sets. Right now we do a lot with, Java and Python engineers, but all cleared. And we work with a bunch of different clients in defense.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Adam. All right. So I understand I would say maybe currently midstream or active in the public sector to private sector transition. Can you share a quick story, I guess, of your background, your clearance level, the role you landed, and kind of how long it took? Or
Yeah, for sure. So I spent most of my adult life, I spent about 12 years in the private sector in telecommunications. And during that time, I spent about 8 years ago, I joined the National Guard as an IT technician, spent quite a bit of time doing that, as a part-time gig. And then I transitioned to become a warrant officer, which gave me my top secret clearance, which is what I use in my role today. So I landed a role as a senior software engineer working for Vega. And then, like I said, that's just kind of where I started at.
awesome. For anybody coming from the service, you understand how rare it is to speak to the mythical warrant officers. So it's it's an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Nick, Securitas is a huge security guard force company. As a general statement or response, does Securitas hire and fulfill clearance required roles?
The short answer is yes, but let me start off by saying thanks for hosting this conversation, Colin. I think it's important. It's mutually beneficial both for industry, industry, and also for veterans and public sector employees that are transitioning out. I think some of our grace or some of our best workforce come from these disciplines. So SCIS is or Securitas Critical Infrastructure Services is the U.S. based subsidiary of the larger Securitas global parent company. So SCIS is the group that I lead. We operate with foreign ownership control and influence mitigation with a separate proxy board of directors here in the U.S. That's what enables us to do almost exclusively work in the defense industrial base, nuclear and intel
Wow,
community spaces. So, so processing clearances, yeah, it's an integral part of our hiring process. And anytime we can recruit and hire candidates with clearances in place already, it saves significant time and effort. And it's like I said, some of the best candidates we employ.
that's awesome. Thank you for the background and sharing. And you're right. I think hopefully the goal here is to reach a lot of really high value transitioning public sector folks. So thanks for calling that out. Doug, you went from being the CSO of a Raytheon business unit to leading now event security and executive protection at KPMG. So rather large organizations to large organizations.
Mhm.
But the KPMG role does not require a clearance. So question there, has there been any notable differences in the role, responsibility, accountabilities that go from a clearance to a non-clearance role?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I want to, before I get started, I want to just kind of ditto Nick's comments. I mean, this is a very valuable discussion, so, and definitely appreciate the invite. So, I mean, that's an excellent question. Yes, there were some definitely notable changes. As a chief security officer for Raytheon, heavily classified environment, working with the Department of Defense, other intelligence agencies with very, very specific requirements, government oversight with government inspections, cybersecurity requirements, 1,500 employees, again, and six very specific security modalities. Transition contrastly going to KPMG, as you talked about, Colin, with no security clearance, but everything was more risk-based without the government oversight. We use a lot of protective intelligence, again, without the government oversight, no inspections, government contracts, we don't have that. Definitely smaller employees and two security modalities. So just going into this role, those were the things that I really, right off the top, saw that there was significant differences from the classified environment to a risk-based environment. But
Yeah.
both of their challenges, both have definitely their challenges, but a little different. But yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no shortage. Neither one's easy. Let's be clear on that.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, no, I love it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, as we're going to continue here, one of the statements that really launched a lot of this, discussion and ideation with SCEA as we were, exploring this during our annual conference, was just this statement, this generalized statement idea that, a lot of public service members hear, and it's this idea that, oh, you have a security clearance. Well, you're going to have no trouble finding a great job. So, that's really what kind of initiated all this, and that's the big part of the webinar here is to dig in and try to separate some fact from fiction. So, Jesse, kind of myth number one here: clearance is going to guarantee you a great job. So, the word guarantee is a tough one. So, I guess
Mm-hmm.
how aligned or far off are we with that statement? And what you see with the placements that you run.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it is kind of far off. We very much value our people that have clearances. And the idea is, once you get out of the military, that you have these positions that are available to you, and it's more, niche, and you have this above other people. So obviously, having a clearance is valuable. But when you are trying to get work at a company, especially like a company like the one I'm at, where every job requires the clearance, there's other things that very much need to be focused on. So, okay, you have the clearance. So now what? When you kind of approach it that way, now it's like, okay, so now you have to have the skill set on top of that, right? But also you want to make sure that you're fitting in with the culture. And when it comes to longevity, that is the most important things that kind of come with that.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned culture, and I saw a couple of heads nod. So I think we'll probably
Yeah.
touch on that again too. So thank you.
Yeah.
Adam, again, being that you've very recently have been going through this, Is that a statement that you've heard or some version thereof? And I guess what was there a gap between the expectation and reality of transitioning into private sector with clearance?
100%. Yeah, I mean, I heard that as early as being a buck private fresh out of AIT, going to my first unit, having some non-commissioned officers who above me who were talking about that kind of thing, right? They talk about how valuable the clearance asset is. You look at my situation, I'd been in 7, almost 8 years prior to doing anything with my clearance, even in the private sector. So I think there is a gap there. I think that we have valued that clearance so highly coming in, in that military culture. And I think we don't discuss how to map that. I think that's kind of what we're getting at with some of this culture discussion is they're distinctly different. So I definitely think there's a gap. And I think we just have to work on closing it and helping people with those resources.
Yeah. No, I love that. Thanks for sharing that insight. So Doug, you retired from military service. When you retired, do you think that the guarantee was stronger? And I'm going to air quote guarantee here. Do you think that guarantee word was stronger, weaker, or maybe the same as when you transitioned? And I think we're aligned that it's kind of the guarantee definitely is not an accurate statement. So, I mean, where do you think it comes from? Does it come from the recruiter base, or where does it develop in there?
Yeah, so when I left the military, kind of to Adam's point, a clearance was really, significant. I left with a top secret clearance, but again, the guarantee, as Jessica talked about, is not really a guarantee. There was a myth out there. So to your question, Colin, it probably was a little weaker because the online presence when I retired was exponentially expanded, since I retired.
Hmm.
So, I think sites like clearance.com, those things kind of give the implication that, hey, if I have a clearance, I'm almost guaranteed a job. So I think a lot of social media has expanded the myth to the point where, hey, when I get out with a top secret clearance, top secret SCI, I will definitely, have a position waiting for me, as we talked about earlier. That really myth is out there. And just one quick story. I remember when I was in the military, there was a gentleman, he was at E9, and he told me the only job I'm going to apply for in corporate America is a vice president. They will hire me as a vice president walking out of the military because I have a clearance. So needless to say, that did not happen, but the myth is out there. So yeah, that's where a lot of it comes from.
Okay,
Definitely.
so I think we could say that the myth endures.
It
Yeah.
definitely does. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. All right. No, I love that, and I love that anecdotal experience. It's very
Right.
interesting.
Mhm.
All right, Jesse. So, we're coming on the last 2 years, I'm not 2 years, sorry, the last 2 decades of GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism. It has produced a large volume of military service
Yes.
members with clearances. So, kind of from a classic supply and demand perspective, if you will, supply is up with people with the clearances.
Yes.
What are you seeing? How is that affecting opportunities?
So, big pool of people. So, since there are a lot of people that have these clearances, there's other things that companies are looking for, right? So, I mentioned earlier the culture fit is super important, but you have to remember too, it's not just the culture fit for the companies, it's vice versa. So, when someone is applying to a job, when you're going and you say, okay, I want to work in a cleared space, I want to work in a SCIF because this is the skill set I have, this is my experience, and I want to work in a mission critical space, what else do you bring to the table? Because what's going to make you stand out from all these other people that also have that top secret clearance?
Mhm.
It's going to be your experience in the military. Did you have to do something that maybe you weren't expected to do and you did, and it ended up being this amazing project? That's what you're going to want to talk about to stand out from the other people that are also applying to the same role. So yes, there's a lot of people, and now it's the space where it's like, how do you stand out? But also the location has become a big thing, because COVID, a lot of people are working remote. Well, we're going into a different time now where people are expected to be in SCIF now, sometimes 5 days a week, depending on the program, right? So we have, I would say, yes, the supply is up, and now it's sometimes even harder to find positions for people.
Yeah. Wow. No, I think
Yeah.
the mention of the differentiation and even just some of the working environment, yeah, those are good points, and I think we're going to touch on those too. So no, yeah, it's an ever-changing landscape. So that's awesome. Nick and Doug. So when you're hiring for, we'll just say a non-clearance related role, a non-clearance role, and you have a stack of really well qualified candidates, and a few of them do have clearance, have a security clearance of one type or another. How does that affect your perspective of their candidacy versus the stack that you already have?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start for our company. Clearances are really tied to our client contracts, statements of work, and our obligations to our customers. So the job descriptions that we use to recruit with, usually stipulate the clearance required to do the work. So sometimes, non-cleared role, we have non-cleared roles for similar positions. They typically will pay maybe a little bit less than the cleared because of the demand of the clearance. Sometimes it drives up the hourly wage in certain key markets. But we like having those roles where we can for purposes of building a talent pipeline. But having said that, candidates who apply with an active clearance, they walk in the door with a clearance, they can be immediately productive for us. So they automatically get moved to the top of the stack of applicants list for us.
Wow, that's great insight.
Yeah. So for us, for KPMG, it actually does not, it's nothing I actually consider, because the job doesn't consider actual clearance. So we're looking at really those required skills for the job. How does it align? Those are the areas that we look at. A security clearance, kind of what Nick says, is tied to a contract. Those individuals need a clearance to work. For us, it does not. So Jessica touched on how the individual fits in. Those are the things I look. Do they meet the required skill set? And how will they fit in an organization? If the position doesn't require clearance, then it's nothing that I would really actually consider. We just hired an individual that if I looked at the clearance, he was an outstanding employee. But if I looked at him as a clearance because he did not have one, I would have missed a great opportunity for an outstanding employee. So the requirements and what the job is posted is what drives me.
That's awesome insight, and I think that's good value for people sitting on both sides of the clearance side, right? So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so clearance and trust, right? Honesty is a huge piece of that. So Jesse, we've talked before, and you've said that you can work with honesty at all levels, right? But you can't work with surprises. So is there an example, and again, you can kind of maybe redact it as you need, but are there any good examples that you can share where a surprise killed a placement?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to use an example kind of from, my past, but one of the biggest things I do, so I'm out of St. Louis, Missouri. We have a huge geospatial hub here. So our biggest thing is bringing people to St. Louis. A lot of people don't realize the geospace here is actually really big. It's one of the biggest in, the United States. So that's what we try to do is bring people to St. Louis, talk about all the great aspects of St. Louis. So I had a candidate that was from a different state. We went through the interview process, and for this specific company, I think it was 4 interviews. So we went through the process the whole time that I interview people, no matter where I've been, no matter what role it's on, I close them every step. So the way you get someone hired is, putting everything up front and being as transparent and honest as possible. I view that as important from the company perspective. I also expect that from the candidate side as well, because that's how you make a good match. So I had this candidate that the whole way was saying, we have no problem relocating to St. Louis. This is how we're going to do it. We've talked to, family. We have family there. All the things that you would expect would be the yes of accepting a role. So, the offer came and I was pretty sure this candidate was going to accept. And, a lot of times candidates will say, okay, I need a few days, which is very normal because they'll have to go make sure everything's good, read the offer and all that good stuff. So this specific candidate came back and was like, my wife and I actually decided we don't want to relocate at this time. So this was after going through all of this, having the conversations about where they would live in St. Louis, what areas would be good for them, talking about food and just all the good stuff, they still said no. And it unfortunately made it made my relationship with the company a little bit more difficult, because
Ooh,
then they're like more hesitant going through the process, you know, the next time, because it's a long process, you know, setting up
yeah.
4 interviews like can take a while for certain companies. And then also on the flip side, this candidate was like, can you find me something where I am? Well, I just went through this whole, you know, this whole process of doing this, and I was transparent with you, and now you're coming to me saying that something that you said was going to work isn't going to work. It kind of makes me a little wary of placing you at a different company. So it hurts a lot of the relationships that, you know, we really care about building, and a lot of candidates care about building as well.
Yeah. That's yeah, that one can be a bit derailing. Yep. Yep. Wow. All right. So one of the myths is, really around this idea that, the big marquee names, if you will, and whatnot, and or kind of the limitation of roles. So, Nick, we confirmed earlier that Securitas, in fact, hires and places a range of cleared roles. So are those roles mainly like guard force roles, or how would you describe the range of those opportunities there?
Yeah, well, for over about 160 plus years, Securitas and some of the legacy companies that Securitas have acquired, like Pinkerton and Burns in the U.S., have been providing guarding services. That's what we were built upon.
Mhm.
But especially as the business has grown, and especially in the last 20 years, technology integration and enablement have really expanded the areas of opportunity for us and our competitors. Because of for SCIS, because of our specialization in a narrow subsection of the larger security services market, we have a diverse set of service operations and career opportunities elsewhere as well. So today, guarding remains probably 70% of our business. But keep in mind, we also need shift supervisors and site supervisors and managers for those guarding operations, so leadership opportunities. And then we have other areas we focus on too, like risk intelligence services, where we do security assessments and penetration testing. We do field investigations for DCSA, for background investigations for clearances. We do executive protection services. We have construction surveillance technicians. We do electronic security technicians. And then we have embedded specialty positions like ISSOs and CSSOs and assistant FSOs and other NISP related assignments. So pretty diverse workforce. Of opportunity.
No, sounds like no shortage of opportunity there. So I guess, Nick, staying with you here, on the concepts of supervisory and leadership tracks. Um, I guess, does a security clearance, does it help with leadership track? I know you made mention that, for Securitas, it really helps bump people up in the kind of the queue, if you will. But I guess talk to me briefly about that supervisory and leadership track.
Yeah, I think, for us, it's not so much the clearance that drives the leadership ability. We're a people organization, so people are our product, right? So the ability to manage people is important. So the leadership experience, the core disciplines learned, and the community engagement that I think veterans and other public service workers gain is probably more helpful in leadership development than the clearance itself.
Mm-hmm.
But we generally, our industry is notoriously poor for high employee turnover, right? And although ours is, because of our subset, we're much better than most, guarding turnover companies. It's still relatively easy to move up to leadership track with consistent performance, and completing some basic leadership development training requirements that we have.
Yeah.
A lot of it is self-motivated, it's self-paced, and it gives a relatively new employee an opportunity to demonstrate their desire to move up.
Yeah.
So my own personal example is one that I try to replicate. I started off, right out of college, working in uniform after having worked in the public housing authority for a few years, and got in with a defense contractor. But
Mhm.
29 years later, I'm still here and I get to lead a great organization. So it's a rare experience in our industry, but it's one that we take seriously about trying to replicate in our organization today.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that's such an important story to share because I do consistently like to share that the security profession seems to be one of the few where people can truly start at, the very entry level boots on ground guard force roles. And the industry, it thrives off of organic growth, and promoting, the high quality, high capability, high value folks to, lead the roles that they previously held. So I think that's a really, really important story to share. Thank you. All right, so Jesse and Adam, when you're placing candidates, and Adam, kind of from your own personal experience here, but is there a notable pattern in what candidates are typically like envisioning with their searches? What they see as the success marker, if you will, and if so, like what are other areas or opportunities that maybe they're not looking at, or they're overlooking, or maybe even just not aware of?
Yeah, so I can kind of take that first. So I think there's two things that I really see. Um, a lot of a lot of candidates come and they're looking for the big name companies, right? So this is, Raytheon, Leidos, Booz Allen, the names that everybody knows. The other thing a lot of times they'll look for is the exact same job at a different company. What they're overlooking when they do this is the entirety of the small and middle company size. And
Wow.
there's a lot of things that and my company is one of these. We offer a lot of things that a lot of big companies can't do, but also in the roles that we have, you might wear more than one hat. You might be a software engineer, but you're also mentoring, right? You might also be working on something internal while you're working on your contract, things like that. But the thing about middle and small size companies that a lot of people miss out on is you really get the growth opportunity that you might not get at one of the big name companies. I think the pay and the geography is something that's overlooked too, because a lot of people are like, oh, like I want to be in these huge cities, right? Well, sometimes the pay doesn't match the geography, right? Whereas if you go to a place that is still a really big tech hub, but isn't Washington, D.C., you can get good pay for, what you're doing. And sometimes even like great pay, and it makes the living a lot better and easier for you.
I think it's, I think that's the small to mid size, and then like you said, kind of the multi hat opportunities. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
really important call out. And Adam, let me bolt on one additional component there, and let me, again, just kind of what you were looking at and how that aligned. But then, as you were going through, your experience there, what did you encounter along the way that helped you? And then, was there anything notable that actually hindered you?
Yeah, so I would say first off, when I was looking, I was clueless. I was lost because it is distinctly it's distinct enough from private sector workforce, general like non-cleared space, right? That it's different enough from that you kind of have you have to have that experience. You have to talk to the people in the industry, and then and kind of understand, recruiters like Jesse and things like that to understand kind of the differences. And then and thankfully, speaking to Jess's professionalism and her abilities, really was able to answer a lot of questions for me coming from that space. Now, one thing that I would add, like as far as hindrance to me, again, like I said, was just that unfamiliarity, and then like that assumption that hey, the clearance is what's going to get you the job. I think something that really helped me once I got into the interviewing and into the process was, hey, wait a minute, this isn't like going to a military board. This is just like interviewing for the skills portion of it. This is just like interviewing for any other job, any other place. The difference is, you may not know exactly what you're going to be doing day to day or what exactly you're going to be working on, right? So, but you can still apply those same skills, those same things you've done day to day, in any other career. And I think that's something that really, once I realized that, I think it was a lot easier and things got a lot better for me.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, great perspectives all around. Thank you for sharing. All right, so Doug, and you made mention to it, in one of your previous answers here, but translating military and government experience into civilian language, I think it's easier said than done. So today we have AI tools and professional resume services and other resources. I guess from your perspective, what guidance can you share that would help people transitioning from public service, public sector, through this translation process?
Yeah, that's really, as you said, that's Another great question, Colin, and it's very dynamic. I went through the process leaving the military
Mm-hmm.
and transitioning to the to corporate sector. So is really a challenge, especially when it comes to the resume process. How do you translate those words? So I'm gonna try to be a little prescriptive here. So AI tools are very good to use. The thing, and also those resume services are good, but you have to be very judicious on how you use them. So I get really it's concerning when I see a lot of applicants, invest a lot of money in these services, and really they don't get what they really want. Because sometimes that's another myth. If I use a resume service, I'm guaranteed to get the job. So you need to look at those things also. But AI tools, that's where I would probably start. Again, I'll be very prescriptive. There are two things you could use to help you. Military.com. Look under military life. It shows how you can transition. It talks about transitioning to that civilian, kind of civilian vernacular. And also ONET Online is also a service that individuals can go to that can really help them. Another thing I want to just kind of ping this because I've seen this before. So individuals that serve time in the military, again, like I have, they will try to send a resume with all of their experience that they've had in the military. The thing I would look for is to make sure that resume is targeted. So if I'm going to go to do security in an SCI environment, then my resume should be targeted to that and those skills that are applicable to the job by really taking a look at what are the required skills and tailor my resume to that. So again, just want to be prescriptive. AI tools are good. Military.com and online, ONET Online is good places to start.
I think that level of prescriptive detail is so important. And, I know Carly and Alyssa, part of our SCEA administrative leadership, we'll make sure that we capture those as well and share them back out
Sure.
with the attendees. Cause those are great resources to list and, kind of what you mentioned and, Jesse, touching into the skills components here on resumes, I'll describe it as funny. I don't mean to be, rude about it, but it is one of these where, I've seen a lot of transitioning service members who still continue to list like their marksmanship badge scores, if you will.
Yes.
And so you see the resumes with the range of skills, right? They sound good or they have these different appearances. But again, a lot of times the skills don't actually touch that they don't touch into reality, I guess. So how do you recommend transitioning members prepare to speak to the skills they list on a resume, especially when it comes to like interviews?
Yeah, so I see this all the time. This is my bread and butter because every day I get, resumes and I do a lot of the same skill sets. So I know, I've gotten pretty used to like knowing like what I'm looking for. So I'll give you an example. So right now we're doing a lot of hiring in the Python and Java development space. So say I have a role that's, mid-level software engineer. We require the top secret clearance because that's always a requirement. So if anyone's sending resumes and they don't have it, it automatically gets, rejected. So if you are someone that is cleared, make sure you have that on your resume, first of all, because a lot of recruiters, if they don't see it, they might skip over it. Then on top of that, in the skills section, they'll have the Python on there. Well, then when I get into the experience section, it doesn't have it listed at all. So it's like, okay, you have that skill set. What do you do with that skill set? There's so many different things you can do with Python or with Java development. But if you don't have it listed, and I have two different people that one does have it listed, I'm going to look more at the person that has it listed because I know what they're doing with it. If I see a resume that doesn't have it, that means in order to find out, I am going to call, and I will call. But sometimes I'll have these calls and people will be like, oh, I've touched it, or, oh, I taught it to myself and I worked on it on a personal project. Well, this role needs 5 years of the experience. If you worked on a personal project, you're not going to have that experience. So we don't necessarily need like a direct number of years of experience, but you do have to be able to show it within your resume that you are actively using it and actively doing something with it to accomplish something.
Gotcha. Nope. I love that.
Yeah.
And so we do have a couple questions building up in the Q&A. If it's okay, well, for the people who submitted some questions, I'll ask if you want us to, engage these during, or if we want to hold them to the end. We got a little bit more content, but I think we'll have plenty of time to engage the questions. All right. So with that, unless I get another note that says otherwise, Nick. So I think we just kind of touched a little bit on the remote and the hybrid, or the I think Jesse mentioned like the at or in the skiff type roles, right? So from what you're seeing, and then Doug, maybe from what you're seeing as well from the KPMG side, clearance roles, and then remote and hybrid opportunities. I guess, where do we sit with that as far as what you're seeing? Again, with client engagements, and then even optionality, right? Is there even an option for those types of environments?
Yeah, I think if you're asking whether or not there are many opportunities for folks with those clearance to work in a remote kind of role, I think I would agree that those are rare, right? For us, the value of having the TS, SCI, and then above that, the Intel community, full scope polygraph or counterintelligence polygraph, the value of having that for us and for our clients is the ability to access those specific, those physical security workplaces, or the networks, or the server rooms that need alarm response, or that need some physical response to. So I think that's, so I think the ability to work from a remote location with those, I think there's very few of those. However, a company like ours, we have dozens of opportunities for those levels across the country, right? Some of those locations are intentionally in very remote parts of the country, on purpose. And so sometimes those are some of the most difficult positions for us to find, a TS SCI cleared person in a very remote part of a state. Can sometimes be a challenge. So, but we literally have them, in a lot of places you may not expect.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Doug, any thoughts on remote and hybrid?
Yeah, just in my previous role, just hybrid remote. Those are one of the things we moved away from it, and it is very difficult working in a classified environment. Some of the things that Nick talked about, working those classified areas, Jessica talked about, working in a TSSCI environment. You open up your company and yourself for security violations, and really not being effective because of certain conversations that you can't even have on an unclassified communication. So it is. When you're hybrid and remote, especially remote, working in a classified environment would be very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Nope. All right. So this one's for the four of you. Question: for someone who is gripping very tightly to I need to find a job that needs my clearance. I really wanted to apply and use my clearance. Is there a case, or what's the case for that candidate to kind of loosen that grip and kind of open the aperture a little bit and look elsewhere?
For me personally, right? Because we talked about my story and how long it took for me to get into the cleared space. I think one thing that we can tell, especially people transitioning out, learning those civilian side skills when you're getting paid to do it is it can be very beneficial to you. And it can lead to those opportunities a lot easier than trying to come out and just get right into that cleared space. I think there's value there if you're having trouble finding that placement, or finding a placement that's right for you. It doesn't mean you can't go and sharpen skills, adapt to the private sector outside the cleared space, and then take those two separate domains of knowledge and combine them to make a really powerful impact in your hiring process for a cleared space job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on what Adam said a little bit. I completely agree with that. Like, soft skills are super important. Especially like engineers. A lot of times, like, we very specifically try to find people that are good with customers, that have good communication skills. I think something else that that would benefit people if they want to work in a cleared space is just being open to relocation. Especially if you're in a space that doesn't have a lot of defense work there. I I see roles all over that are open. I obviously spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, so I'm connected with people that are hiring all over the country. And there are niche roles. There's not like, I mean, there's system engineers, you can find them anywhere. But if someone lives in the middle of nowhere in, Minnesota, like you might need to move in order to find the role that actually makes sense for you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned LinkedIn, and I'll just call it out right now. Maybe just a good thumbs up, but I think everybody's going to be ready for some LinkedIn connection requests, which is good. Let's hit some of the questions here. So, and again, for the group, please just chime in for what, you want to engage with and how you, because again, I think somebody's going to hit each of you in a different area here. So for someone coming out of federal service, for equal roles, does it matter which agencies someone comes from? For example, a cleared security specialist, a GS-15 from NSA or FBI or Department of Commerce or NIH.
So if I can speak on it from my viewpoint, so I think having any of those is obviously going to be beneficial. We specifically work with a lot of that background. I think if you're like looking for a defense position, depending on like what work you have worked on in the past, it will be more beneficial for specific roles, right? So like giving you an example, like we work a lot with or like in general with NGA, so National Geographic Intelligence Agency, right? So someone that comes from aerospace background, there's different ways that they can be implemented into the NGA that will work really well with their background. So depending on what agency you've worked with, there's ways to, be a great fit for different agencies.
Love that. All right, moving on to the next question. Ryan asks, are there different nuances between being a cleared service member, a government employee, and a private citizen?
Yeah, there are definitely nuances. I mean, in your military service, you may have a clearance, you may be working, in secured environments, relating to direct mission type activities. As a government employee, you may go to work for an agency in that cleared space where, like, kind of, you might work directly for NGA as an example, right? So you're going to be working on NGA missions directly. You're going to be really, involved versus going into like contracting as like a private citizen who works as a contract like myself. You may be in that program at like NGA and you're working alongside government employees directly, but you also have flexibility. Say another opportunity in another agency comes up or something that fits your skill set or interest. You might have that ability, and it may work out better for you if you're wanting to move around and find what your niche is, especially if you're getting out and you don't know what that is right away.
Yeah, no, I love that. All right, this question from Rachel, I think, Doug, Nick, Jess, I think this would be a good one for you all to chime in on here. So what advice would you have for an organization that is looking to make its first hire of a security cleared individual? What should I be looking for and thinking about as I enter into that hiring process? And is there anything different for a full-time employee versus a contractor role? That one's a complicated one, so I'll kick that one to the trio.
I can speak on it if yeah, I guess I can. So I actually love that question. So as far as, sorry, Colin, can you just repeat it again one more time?
Yeah.
Make sure I answer.
So the organization is looking to make their first
placement
security clearance hire.
Yeah. So I'll touch on that. Yeah, I'll touch on that first. So I think what the most important thing, and I was very lucky to be one of the first hires at my company, so I very much have been able to grow with the company. Our CEO of our company, one of the things he said to me when he hired me was, you want to hire good people and then get the heck out of their way, pretty much. So when you're hiring people, the first thing you should be looking at, it doesn't have to be the clearance aspect. It should be what you want to see your company grow into. So that means that the first thing you should be thinking about when you're hiring someone is the culture. What do you want your culture to look like? Because we're small company working on growing. We're very drastically growing, but in this space, I think one of the things that has been very successful for us has been that when we hire people that are cultural fit for us. They're lifelong learners, they're curious minds, people that when they go home from their mission work, they're the people that are 3D printing something because that's what they're excited about. They're learning about other stuff. I mean, this is Adam. This is our employee Adam that's on this. So those things I think are more important when you're looking at your first hire is when you're starting at the ground. What do you want your culture at your company to look like? Because that's going to shape every hire you have in the future.
I think for nuance, I think they have multiple employees already. I think this is their first clearance employee.
Clearance hire. Okay.
Yeah, from that perspective, are there nuances? There different triggers or different check boxes they need to really be paying attention to?
Yeah, so definitely checking the clearance at the beginning. That's how we do it. When I have my first conversation, they go through the FSO clearance check right away before we, spend any time sending them on, because who wants to go through 4 interviews to find out your clearance isn't active?
That's a great call out. Can you just speak to that just a little bit more? I think maybe, and Doug and Nick too, of the distinction of it would be really tragic to get down that roadmap and then find out the person said they had a clearance and no they don't, it's expired or it's whatever status, right? Nick, you came off mute.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think if you're hiring cleared people because you have a government contract or a subcontract where you have a specific clearance that you're trying to meet the requirements of a contract, make sure you have the right kind of clearance, right? I think that alluded to it. Not all clearances are equal. And although the government has been making promises for decades about reciprocity and sharing of clearances, and some of the processes are very similar, they don't always work as smoothly as some purport them to work. So I see Doug smiling, so he knows he's had that experience as well. And especially when you get into some of the intel community, and there are some agencies that work better with others, and some that don't cooperate at all. And so I think you just make sure you're checking the right boxes, you're meeting the right requirement, right? A Justice Department clearance is not a Department of War clearance. A DOE is a DOD.
Mm-hmm.
Treasury has their own. National Security, SF-85P, as they used to call it. The sort of the bare bones version is not the same as other clearances. So just make sure you're meeting the right standard for each one.
Yeah, that was Nick, you got me. I was laughing because you used the word reciprocity, so you took me back there. But yeah, that's really interesting. But yeah, as you both have stated, Jessica and Nick talked about, I think the barrier for entry is when you're hiring for a clearance job based on a contract is baseline is, does the individual have the proper clearance for the position? You could have a right employee, but and just full disclosure, sometimes, we've made hires where we needed a TS and this person was fantastic, and a person came in with a secret clearance or an expiring clearance. And so we literally sit there and wait for that clearance to be updated and adjudicated. So it could be really challenging, but the barrier for entry is a clearance. Also, I want to touch on something that Jessica keeps pinging on, when we do interview, we do ask those behavioral type questions. So when I would interview, I would always have an HR person with me to ask those behavioral type questions to see if the individual, how quickly they can adjust to the culture so they can be effective. Because we want our employees to be successful. But part of sometimes where they're not successful is because they can't adjust to the culture. So we ask those behavioral things. And I heard this at a conference like many years ago, but I look at a lot of employees just like a professional athlete. Well, professional athletes, we always know once you get selected, you always try to hone your skills. Well, security professionals should be the same way. So when you're hired, you should always try to hone your skills. I literally walked into Raytheon as a security education lead with one employee and stayed there, just kind of like Nick said, as he elevated himself to be the president of his organization, moved to the CSO because it was, I need to hone my skills, because I would look at the jobs that I wanted and saw where the gaps were and then worked on those gaps, and that worked. So, yeah,
no, that's incredible. I love those perspectives. And, Rachel, I think again, this is a really, really interesting and real time and complex questions. So I think part of it too, post the webinar, I would invite you to connect, I think, with Rachel and the panel. I think everybody's LinkedIn will be on there, but I think it would be worth some follow-up discussion there, some focused follow-up. So do we have any other questions from the group, from the attendees? All right. Oh, Rachel, you're welcome. Thank you for the great question. All right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap here just a few minutes early, which I think is, again, a really complex topic. I feel like we had a really robust discussion, and again, so I do want to make one more just plug to SCEA, because again, the attendees list is really full of, again, it's the engagement from across the industries, right? We've got people in attendance that are covering our government sectors, our various industries, academia and nonprofits. So, again, it's really a request or an invite to join us at SCEA, to join us at the Security Foundation. Help us continue to have big and robust discussions across across this very complex, always evolving, always changing, industry and profession. I mean, we deal with poly-risk, poly-threat environments that are just changing by the minute, it seems. Carly's also added a link into the chat for everybody. Again, you can follow us there. But with that, really, again, thank you to our incredible panelists. Thank you for sharing your time, your knowledge, your perspective, and experiences with us. I again really just cannot say thank you enough to everybody for attending and for our panelists for sharing. So with that, any parting words of wisdom?
I'll just jump in. So no, again, this has been outstanding, and I really appreciate your time, and also definitely working with an outstanding panel also. So I really was honored to do that. Just to the participants, just continue honing your skills, continue to network, look at the job that you may want, and look at the gaps in those areas, and then work on those areas. And I think that would be beneficial. And as far as the resumes, again, not a 7-page resume. Just make sure that the resume, I've had those, but just make sure the resume is very targeted to the job you want. And don't hesitate to reach out. Use LinkedIn, as Colin, you mentioned several times, and definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you need assistance. But good luck to you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to say the same thing. Colin, I really appreciate you inviting me to do this. And if anybody has resume or interview questions as well, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I work on resumes on the side as well. So it's something that I'm passionate about. And I really want to help people put their best foot forward, especially when it comes to just being on paper, because that's how you stand out, right? So please feel free to reach out.
Love that. Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, I think I'd echo the comments of Doug and Jesse. I think sometimes getting through the application robots of applicant processing can be painful. I know we all have that experience from time to time. I've got two daughters in their 20s that have recently been looking for jobs and working through that process. So I understand. So feel free to reach out. A personal connection is always helpful. I know that we'll get you in touch. For SCIS, we have everything on our company website. That's available, and some of the more specialty positions are typically on our LinkedIn page. So feel free to look there, and some of the this other specialty work like clearancejobs.com in some other areas. But happy to help with a personal connection as needed. But thank you, Colin, and the rest of the panelists, Doug, Jesse, Adam. Appreciate the great engagement here.
I got one question that came in via sidebar. It's a quick one. For someone who has who transitioned a while ago, maybe a couple years ago, and they don't actually know how to correctly categorize their clearance status, they don't have access to DIS anymore. Any tips, tricks there? Can they reach out to somebody, or is there a process? How do they verify their clearance status?
If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I can have our FSO run it for you. There's a lot of different companies that you can reach out to, but I'm happy to do that if you want to get in contact with me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Solving problems. Bam.
Yeah.
Any parting words from Adam?
You and for those people who are transitioning out, like the big thing, like was already said, network. Try to find whatever gaps. If you need guidance on that, look at the networks like what we have here, and try to find those people who can help you if you're lost. Because I know I was.
Nope, I love it. All right, and I want to do one more just call out for our again, we have some SCEA leadership on the program behind the scenes today, but Carly and Alyssa, and a lot of the SCEA and the Security Foundation, the TSF leadership, none of this happens without any of them. So huge kudos and thank you to the behind the scenes teams. But anyway, that's it for me. Thank you, everybody. Again, the link for the Security Foundation is in the chat. Please join us, follow us, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.